the drone's purpose was essentially reproductive. And often they had copulated with the queen or whatever they do. That was it for them. And I think for a lot of men, they've taken on the role of the drone.
Real men, raw stories, radical perspectives. This is the voice of authentic masculinity. This is Manhood Speaks. Nigel Bishop, welcome to Manhood Speaks, the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Kanu. My pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you on. Let's dive straight into it.
Sure.
What area or goal are you currently prioritizing your life?
I am working now on becoming a better communicator because it's something within my reach, and it's something that I and just about anyone can do to really improve himself or herself. Particularly if you want to become a good speaker, because you can use AI to do anything. But if someone tells you, look, you turn up here and speak to us in the flesh, that's where you may run into problems. So I'm working on becoming a good public speaker.
Why is that so meaningful to you?
It's meaningful because I think that, like many people, I've always had a degree of social anxiety. And it applies particularly when I'm asked to speak in public. And I can remember when I was at high school, I finished high school in Toronto. I remember when I had to do a presentation and my face couldn't move. My jaw seized up. I was so tense. And I've never forgotten that. And I never want anything like that to happen to me ever again. So I'm making sure that I come as close to mastering this public speaking thing as I can.
That experience where your jaw freezed up, what lesson did that teach you?
It taught me that you need to speak well in public. It taught me that we are, I think, a little too concerned about how other people see us, because that's what it's all about, you know. When you are afraid of speaking in public, it's because you're too self-conscious, you're too self-focused. And the more you can just forget about yourself and forget about what you should be paying attention to, which is very often the person in front of you or your circumstances, then all your self-consciousness just evaporates. That's the lesson it taught me.
I guess that's a very important lesson. So how do you see this public speaking having an impact on your future going forward?
One of the ways that I make a living now is as a lawyer. And it's often assumed that once you're a lawyer, you're a good speaker. Nothing could be farther from the truth, because I think that when I was trained, I went to the Norman Manley Law School in Jamaica. There was no public speaking element in our training. I think it was assumed that you would pick it up along the way. But what happens is that a lot of lawyers are really desk lawyers. They just sit and read and draft documents. That's all they do. So they never ever become good at public speaking. And if you to be complete as a lawyer, if you're to be complete in many other professions, you have to be able to speak well about what you're doing. And it helps if you can speak to 100 people at once, instead of having to speak to an individual 100 times if you want to get your message across to a large number of people. So it's a matter of economy. If you can speak well, you can economize on the time you expend and the energy you expend on getting a message out, whatever that message may be.
I would have never thought that lawyers aren't taught public speaking. I thought that every lawyer, he or she is just, they are taught this or they are just naturally good at speaking. So this is new information for me. It's rather interesting as well. You mentioned Jamaica. Tell me a bit about your background, your childhood, your upbringing.
I was born in Trinidad. My parents, their marriage didn't last particularly long because I know that at the age of 5, my parents were separated. And for whatever reason, my mother just scooped me up and my little brother and migrated to Jamaica. She had been to university there, and maybe that has something to do with the choice of Jamaica. And when we went there, it was a little unsettled at first because we would live in this place for a little while, then we'd move to another place, and then another place, always little rented accommodations. So that was the kind of unsettling part of it. But she was able to get us into good schools. She happened to be a French teacher, and she taught at a good school, and that school had a good prep school attached to it. So we both went to a good prep school, and that kind of lays the foundation. You get good training early. And she gave us a lot of training at home also, so that helped. After prep school, well, we went the usual route. I went to one high school, which was the one closest to me. My brother went to another high school, which was a little posher, but that was the kind of guy he was. And I think we developed naturally. We had a kind of fairly normal upbringing. We got to go places. We traveled Jamaica. We went to every summer holiday. Sometimes we'd leave Trinidad. We'd leave Jamaica. We'd go back to Trinidad to see our father. But if we didn't, for sure, our mother would send us. She'd send us somewhere. So we got good exposure. And I think that it was a rather privileged upbringing. I don't think I missed anything.
You mentioned that you moved around quite a bit as a child. How do you think that shaped your identity? You moved from Trinidad and then to Jamaica, and while in Jamaica, you moved to many different places. How did that shape or affect your identity?
I think it may have made me a little unstable, just a little. Because I think that if you grow up in some kind of family unit, and you're always in one place, especially if it's a good place with lots of family around, I mean extended family, then you grow up with, I think, a greater sense of family and connectedness to family. And because our mother took us off to Jamaica, I was 5, my brother was 4, took us off to Jamaica so early, it kind of separated us from our extended family, somewhat. As I said, she did make an effort to send us back to Trinidad every year so that we could kind of maintain that bond with our family and with other members of the family. So I think it just gives you a slightly diminished, it gave me a slightly diminished sense of family.
Your family separated while you were the age of 5.
Yes.
You moved to Jamaica with your mother, you and your brother. What impact do you think that had on you, being separated from your father? This boy who no longer has his father there with him when he needs him.
Well, in my case, I'm not sure that it made that much of an impact because my mother was very careful to make sure that we stayed in touch with him. So we were sent to him, and he even came to visit us in Jamaica 1 year. So there was always the sense that we had a father around. And, he'd send us things. If we needed anything, we could always call him up, and he'd send it to us. So I don't think I suffered at all by not having my father actually living with me all the time.
Because that is a case where many persons, many young men, no longer have their father in the home, and they look to others for that sense of guidance and leadership. Was there any point in time where there was someone in the community, on TV, that took up or you looked up to as a father figure when your father wasn't there?
I would say no. I would say that there were brief encounters. I can remember one person in particular whom I admired growing up. He was an equestrian. He rode horses, and he was very interested in show jumping. His name was Joseph Irons. He wasn't that much older than I was. And I kind of idolized him, but I idolized him because I wanted to become as skillful an equestrian as he was. So if you were to ask me if there were any masculine traits that he taught me or instilled in me, the answer would have to be no.
Okay. What major life experience that you have experienced or event that helped shifted the way you view life?
But it would definitely have to be the death of my parents. My mother died in 2012 in Jamaica at 77. I remember I went over there when she was very ill. So my brother and I went to the hospice every single day to see her until we got the call, sorry, don't bother to come today because she has died. And then in 2021, my father died. He died right here in Trinidad because he fell and broke his hip. And I don't know if you know that in a large number of cases where elderly people are concerned, he was 91. When they break a hip, the decline in their health is steep.
Yes, I've learned that.
And he died in 4 months.
Oh.
And now, having lost both parents, it has made me realize, look, that's it. You don't have any parents to reach out to. You have to try to arrange your life and get things together for yourself. And where you might have considered yourself as someone's child, even though you were an adult, now that's it. You're on your own. Nobody owes you a living. My parents didn't even owe me a living. They did a very good job, trying to get a good education and so on. But I think now I'm kind of forced to think about what it means to be a man.
What has that taught you? What lessons have that taught you?
That going through life, while your parents are alive, you can, if they're fairly prosperous, you can cruise through life, without a plan, without really being aware that you are responsible for yourself. You may even go ahead and have children and still not recognize that you are responsible for yourself and you're responsible for other people because your parents are alive. When your parents die, it not only forces you to realize, oh, I have to be independent to some degree, but it also makes you think about your own mortality, because I know, as far as I'm concerned, I'm next. So that's what it's taught me. The death of parents means you have to be independent, and that's the first one. Two, your time's coming, and it's coming probably sooner than you think.
On the topic of independence, what is your perspective on manhood and independence?
Being independent requires, I think, that you have a plan and that you have an education. Perhaps I should start by saying that you have an education. I was fortunate enough to have parents who recognized the importance of getting a good education. Many people don't have the privilege of having two parents. And if they have two parents, they don't have two parents who are so keen on education. Well, as keen as on education as mine were. So that they don't get a good education in the first place. But that's something you can overcome. Even more so these days, people can be self-educated, particularly because of access to the internet. And all it requires a willingness to get that education. Once you recognize what's important for you to make a living. The other thing is that having an education is one thing, but then you also need a plan. So I've got this education. Let's hope it's something practical. It's not the history of art or something like that. You've got some kind of practical skill or some kind of expertise that people will be willing to pay you for. Then you have to decide, how am I going to make the most out of this skill? And then it would help, once you formulated a plan, it would help if you had some kind of contingency. Yeah. Because you may be, let's say you become a doctor, right? You become a doctor and then you turn around and find out that a lot of people are no longer going to see the doctor. They go straight to the laptop. They tell AI what the symptoms are. And they try to learn as much about what the symptoms are and what can be done. And if it's something that can be treated with medication, they then go to the pharmacy and they end up bypassing the doctors. So you may have a good education, you may belong to one of these so-called learned professions, but then you need a contingency plan. What happens if people no longer need the service that I'm offering? So I mentioned having a good education, and the other thing is having a plan to put that education to best use. And then having a contingency plan if your first plan falls through.
What is an example of a contingency plan that you think a man should have today?
Well, your contingency plan should involve knowing things that people will always rely on someone to do. So that, for instance, and here I've already fallen down in this regard. For instance, every guy should have some kind of very practical skill. I'm not a hands-on, I'm not a handy kind of person. The most handy thing I could do is change a flat tire. I can't do any plumbing. I can't wire a house. I can't fix my car. I can't even change oil. I think that every man should know, look, if the job that I've been trained for becomes redundant, perhaps because of artificial intelligence or whatever, maybe my employer says, you know what, we can't afford to keep you on. You should be able to find something else to do in the meantime. And it could be that you're going to become a whacker man. So you may have to swallow your pride. But essentially, I'd say you have to have a practical skill right there that you're comfortable with and that you're willing to apply to make a living to feed yourself. And if you're in the position of having dependents, to feed those dependents. So it's a serious thing, and it's becoming more likely these days that your skill or your occupation may become redundant because of AI.
I think that's very important advice to every man, every young man who is growing up. That is advice that they ought to take and hold it close to them, because you never know when something may come up. We recently had COVID-19, and how many persons were jobless, especially if you have to provide for a family. So that is valuable lessons, valuable advice that you are given there. Tell me about defining personal moment or event in your life.
I can remember once while my brother and I and my mother, we were living in this apartment building in Jamaica, and there was a pool there, and there were some people tossing around in the pool. They didn't live at the apartment, and one of them got into difficulty, and he went under. And he was under for a little while. And then someone went and fished him out. He was unconscious, but he was resuscitated. And that taught me, one, it's very important that you learn how to swim. Again, fortunately, my parents had me and my brother learn how to swim very early. But the other thing is that I didn't lift a finger to try to rescue this person. It took someone else to do that. And I was a swimmer. I could have gone in and fetched him. But you know, you're paralyzed because you never encountered a situation like that. And so that, it taught me that perhaps we should sit and consider the kinds of things that could happen so that we prepare ourselves mentally to act in the event that something happens.
That's powerful. I guess we can't always prepare for every eventuality, but to remain prepared, especially as a man, it would be necessary. It is important. And I would always go back to, especially if you have a family, if you have children. Let's say that was your child that fell into that pool, being able to provide CPR to save that child life, it could be all on you. So that is important.
Yes.
What does it mean to embody masculinity for you? What does masculinity mean for you?
But I don't think it's an exciting thing, you know.
Why not?
Because, you know, if you go online, you hear that women are looking for bad boys, right? And you think of an exciting guy who's going to turn up on a big motorcycle, and he's going to swoop her up, put her on the back of his bike, and go roaring off. And they're going to do all kinds of things, exciting things. He's going to take her here, he's going to take her there. And she's going to come back really satisfied. She's got a great adrenaline rush. And whenever she's with that guy, because he's so unpredictable, she's always at the edge of her seat. But she loves it because she feels, okay, well, I'm living life, I'm fully alert. But as I've grown older, and certainly I might have been someone who subscribed to that school of thought, but as I've grown older, I've come to realize that really, for me, masculinity has to do with stability, predictability, even for the people who are around you, and resourcefulness, so that you may be a guy who gets up every day, goes to a job somewhere, right? One hopes that it's a job that you'll have for a long time, but you go into that job, the same job. You may not be growing rich doing that job, but you're making sure that you're getting enough money in to cover the bills, your own bills, but more important, the bills of all the people who depend on you. And so everybody else can rely on you to provide, and providing may provide and protect. And when I say protect, you're protecting people, perhaps not literally. You may be a skinny little guy with 140 pounds, but you may be able to protect them economically. I think that's what people are looking for. And then, of course, there's a whole thing of leadership. And if you're going to be an effective man, I think you have to be able to lead the people who depend on you. And very often that's a woman and her children, who may also be your children. And you want to be able to show them that there is a certain path to follow, and you want them to come along with you along that path. Because at the end of that path, there is success. There are good things. And anyone looking on, a young person, a young think, boy, what a dull life. The same thing day in, day out, but you and your family are eating. There's no drama in your life. Everyone's developing at the rate at which that person should develop. And so I think that's it. It's boring, but it gets results. And it builds a nice, firm foundation for whoever's to come.
So, stability, predictability,
Reliability.
What if reliability? What if this man is unable to provide these things? Let's say he has become disabled. Where does he fit on that spectrum of masculinity, in your opinion?
Right. it becomes very difficult for that man, because if he always saw himself as the reliable provider, and then he becomes someone who can't even provide for himself, then I think he may decide for himself, what purpose am I serving now? And that's something that perhaps every man who has dependents needs to think about. I fortunately have 2 potholes at home. That's it. So if anything happens to me, those potholes, I hope somebody will adopt them. But for everybody else, you have to think about it. You're traveling the roads, and you could have an accident. It could turn you into someone who really can't help himself. So I don't know what to tell you. You have to prepare for it. Every man has to think about what would happen if he were to lose his strength and his ability to provide.
So purpose, based on what you're saying, purpose, a man's purpose is something that is significant to him and for him, that without purpose, he would lose direction. But what if I'm a man and I don't have a sense of purpose? I am just existing. What's that question? How do I show up? Am I less than a man?
Well, the answer is yes. You are just another living creature using up resources, and you don't have a plan for yourself. You don't have anyone to lead. Then really, you're redundant. You're like some kind of, when I think of bees, you've heard that there are the worker bees.
Yeah.
Right? There's a queen. And then there's a class of bee called the drones. And I'm thinking, as I'm speaking to you, I'm trying to remember what the drones did. I think the drones' purpose was essentially reproductive. And often they had copulated with the queen, or whatever they do. That was it for them. And I think for a lot of men, they've taken on the role of the drone. And perhaps they try to stretch it and try to have as many children as possible. But then after that, after you've had your children, what else is there for you? And I can well imagine that a lot of those people end up mentally ill. They end up in a life of crime. They end up as wards of the state, which is the last thing a man wants to be. A burden on the state. We're supposed to be the people with the ideas and the resources, not a burden to everyone else. And unfortunately, there are a lot of young men with energy and potential who've gone off the edge and now find themselves in prison. It's such a shame, such a waste. But there's a way out of that. The other day, I was looking at social media or something, and I saw this guy in East Africa. And apparently he runs an academy for boys where he trains the boys, and he has them lined up like soldiers. And he trains them what it is to be a man. So that it's not left to chance. It's not left to the hope that your parents will teach you, or that you have a father who has a very good idea of what it is to be a good father. and he teaches you. So what we have to do, really, I think, is we have to have more people who are deliberately and formally training boys and young men what it is to be a man, how to be useful, how to serve, how to lead, how to make sure that everything stays together. And women love a man like that. That's the kind of man. Women, I think women talk a lot about being independent and this and that. And they're working hard towards it. But I think that every woman, if you really get her to be frank, she said, look, I want a strong man who can take care of me and who can lead me and lead my children. That's what I want. And then once I find a man like that, then I can relax. And I can really enjoy my life. I can focus on the things I want to focus on, which may even be your career. But she still has that sense of stability under her when she has a really strong man leading her.
I love that you brought up that topic.
Yeah.
Young girls have an idea when they are becoming a woman, when they are turning that page, and that is indicated by their menstrual cycle. When does a boy become aware that he's no longer a boy, that he's now a man?
I don't know. I think that maybe for some people it's they equate manhood with sexuality and perhaps having a child of their own. But I think that there are a lot of people who father children, but they still don't become men because they don't take on the responsibility of raising children. They don't take on the responsibility of having a plan. They don't take on the responsibility of having a pool of resources for themselves and for all of their dependents. So I don't know. I think a lot may depend on the kinds of institutions that people have access to, such as a church or a mosque or somewhere that really traditional values are being espoused. And the teachers have a good sense of what it is to become a man and what it is to become a woman. But I think there are very few people who really have access to these institutions. Or if they have access, they're not using it.
Do you think that there is a possibility that boys who become men are still in that boyhood stage because there is no clear demarcation from moving from boyhood into manhood, so that we are having men who are physically and supposedly mentally should be men, but they are actually boys?
Yeah, I think that if you look around and you see instances of men misbehaving, there are many, then you realize that here's someone who's still at the boy stage, someone who is quick to lose his temper, quick to raise his voice, quick to want to become physical if he disagrees with someone or if he thinks he's been treated with disrespect. And for me, that's a key indicator that you are still at the boyhood stage. I mean, for me, and pardon me, I think I may have lost track of the question.
Oh, so I was asking that, is there a clear demarcation when a boy becomes a man Because if there isn't that clear demarcation, then possibly is that a reason why we are seeing persons who are supposedly or should be men acting as boys because they are still in that boyhood stage.
Right. And I don't think there's a clear demarcation unless you've been told this is what you should be aiming for. And when I think of men really developed, mature men, you know, when I think of someone who's a stoic, he doesn't fly off the handle. He doesn't react a lot. He's really calm. And I think of some of our politicians. I used to look at politicians. I'm talking about recently here in Trinidad, who would react to everything. If they get criticized from one quarter, then the next time they appear in public and they're at a mic, they're retaliating. I think a mature man realizes, look, a lot of people are going to disagree with decisions that I take, decisions that I make, and actions that I take. But that doesn't mean that I have to convince them that I am right and they are wrong. And I think if more men recognized that if I'm right, the ideal man is a stoic, then as young men grew up, they would be trying always to kind of curb their impulses, and there would be a gradual increase in that ability to curb their impulses, and that would be the path to becoming a man, right? It's not a clear demarcation, it's a gradual development. So that certainly by the time you're 40 years old, you should have recognized the importance of self-control, self-restraint. Yes, you may have a lot of power. Yes, you may be physically very strong. Yes, you may have lots of resources because you're well educated and you have a skill or a profession that allows you to make a lot of money. But you're still not expending your resources recklessly. You're always looking to protect. You're looking always for stability. And if I may go on for a little longer, I have a friend, someone I admire immensely, his mantra is, I am providing not for my children, not only for my children, not only for my grandchildren, but I'm providing for 4 generations. And I think he really is. I mean, I haven't had a chance to look at his bank account. And it may not just be a bank account. It may be that he spends a lot of time training his children and training his grandchildren. This is how I want you to approach life. So that's it. I mean, I've kind of gone off and kind of lost my way, but that's the answer is I don't think there's a clear demarcation. It's a gradual maturing into manhood.
You stated that the ideal man should be a stoic. And from my understanding, I actually love stoic philosophy. That a stoic is one who has greater control over his emotions, which is a good quality that you should have as a man. However, there's that aspect of masculinity or manhood where men tend to suppress their emotions. So they may go too far off on that spectrum of suppressing their emotions, and that causes further problems, because any emotion that is suppressed for an extended period of time will eventually find its way out. and it may come out when you least expect it and when you are unable to control it. So, what are your thoughts when it comes to a man being vulnerable, being able to not suppress his emotions, but to be able to express his emotions? And I'm speaking about the full spectrum of emotions. What are your thoughts on that?
But it's difficult. It's difficult because I think that I'm conservative, kind of traditional. I wept at my mother's funeral. Went at my mother's funeral. I delivered the eulogy and had a hard time at one point. But I've not done that since.
Oh,
so I don't know. The thing about being a man who cries, there's a time and a place for tears. If I had a wonderful car and somebody were to come and scratch my car, I might find that's a good reason to cry. And I think a lot of men think like that. But the thing about expressing emotion, I mean, I can see it. I can see the emotion being expressed very productively with children. Being around a man being around his children and really treating them well and treating them lovingly and kissing them and hugging them, that kind of thing. But I want to get back to the thing about being a weepy man. I don't know if I'm so comfortable with being a weepy man. There's a time and place. I think more often than not, men should not cry. More often than not. But I have to think about that one.
I want to dig a bit deeper on this point here. Men should not cry. And why I want to dig a bit deeper on this, because I have had an experience where I was not able to cry for years. And I mean, the tears would come, it would be right there, but it couldn't come. And one of my friends got killed. And I cried. I broke down. And that was the first time I had cried in probably 5 to 7 years or more. And I am harping on this point because men tend to see crying as a sign of weakness. But crying is a natural part of the human experience. That crying actually allows you to release the load that you have been carrying, that emotional burden. But men often see it as weakness. And if a man sees a next man crying, he sees him as a weepy guy, as you stated.
You know.
But do you think that there is value in a man being able and comfortable in shedding tears? Something that is natural in the human experience and something that is actually beneficial to him emotionally and mentally.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. When my father died, I made a point of crying, but not in public. And so that when I delivered the eulogy at his funeral, it was not a problem. Women are so good at crying that a woman can cry and still speak. woman can cry, speak through her tears, running down her face because she's practiced crying. And the problem for me is that because I don't practice crying, if I have to cry, I can't speak. And I think it's very important that men be articulate and men be eloquent, regardless of the circumstances. Women have mastered crying and speaking at the same time. And that's the skill that men should have. Because I'm sure that it makes sense to be able to have this relief valve that you just open when you're under stress. Usually, I think for most men, it's in when someone really close has died. It would be good to be, of course, it's helpful to be able to weep, but you shouldn't weep in a way that prevents you from thinking straight. And because we don't practice weeping, when we get in a position where we have to weep, we don't want to weep because we know it's going to prevent us from thinking straight. And a man needs to be able to think straight all the time. So that's my position on expressing emotion. Sure, it's healthy, but it mustn't affect your thinking straight.
And I agree with you with that you shouldn't allow your emotions to affect the way you think and the decisions that you make. So it's about, as you said, knowing time and place, being able to express the emotions and then getting back to what needs to be done. However, I think it is also very important that it is normalized for boys and men to cry, even if it means crying in your room where no one is around. Because I believe, and this is my opinion, that because as men, we suppress our emotions so much that it finds avenues where it escapes. So we may be hurt, we may feel sad, we may feel fearful, but we may respond in a way that is aggressive because we don't want to be seen as weak. And if we shed tears, then we are seen as a weakling. So aggression comes out, violence comes out. So I think that there's need for that balance where as a man, you are comfortable expressing your emotions, but also learning to regulate your emotions so that you do not go from one end of the spectrum where you suppress to where you express one particular emotion, which is anger, which may lead to violence. And in some instances, it could also lead to an individual taking their life, because there's a high instance of men taking their lives. And one possible reason could be is because they aren't able to truly express their emotions. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I certainly agree with you. If you become a hurt man or a redundant man, then it's a nice decisive step, some think, to just end it all. So I agree with you. I have no questions about what you're saying.
Okay. Tell me, how has your idea of being a man evolved over the past decade?
I've had the privilege of knowing some people, meeting some people through church, mainly. And I've looked at people who are about my age. These are my contemporaries, but they have led much more traditional, stable kinds of lives. These are people who are married with children. I'm thinking of two in particular. A few years ago, and I'm asking the question, how is my sense of what it is to be a man evolved over the last decade or so? I'm thinking particularly of a pastor who I met, who had come here from Switzerland. He was Ghanaian from West Africa, but he was based in Switzerland. And his overseers had sent him to the Caribbean, to Trinidad actually, to open a church. And I saw this guy's sense of purpose, this guy's willingness to deny himself and his own comforts just to achieve an objective that had been set for him. So that I saw a man who was willing to deny himself, right? So it's contributed to my sense of this. It has a lot to do with stoicism. It's not all about hedonism, my pleasure, and my ability to express my emotion. No, sometimes it's a matter of just wrapping it up for the time being and getting a job done. And he did that remarkably well. But he was a family man. He had 4 children, twin boys, and an older boy and a girl. And he had everything. He was able to control everything, keep everything in order. Now, he had a wonderful wife who really did a lot with the children. But he was her foundation as far as I could see. And then more recently, there was someone who I met at another church. And he, again, a guy with 1, 2, 4 children again. I think, boy, the magic number. If you have 4 children, somehow it makes you grow as a man. And what I liked about this guy was that he was so pleasant and harmless looking if you were dealing with him in other circumstances. But he could switch like that. Can you imagine having a nice guard dog who can play with the children? He's a big puppy, but the moment danger appears, that dog switches. That's how he was. And so I think that the way that my regard, my estimation of masculinity has changed is that I've recognized is that you have to be able to become a dangerous man when you need to be. That's the thing. Otherwise, you're a big teddy bear.
All right. Tell me something. What do you wish younger men should know about manhood? Let's say they don't have a father figure in their life. What do you wish that these younger men should know about manhood?
That it's something they're going to have to think about. And it would help if they could find a mentor, someone who can really guide them along. But if they can't find a mentor, they better go and find it somewhere else. Or start reading. You have to. I was talking earlier about an academy that would teach boys to become men. That's a privilege that most of us will never enjoy. I wish I could go to one now, but that's a privilege that most of us will never enjoy. So we have to identify people who we think embody masculinity, the best kind of masculinity, the real kind of masculinity, and then pat ourselves on that. Read a good book, read an autobiography, read a biography about the lives of these men, and that's one part to it. I mean, I'm still looking myself, still looking.
If you had one message to give to the man who is listening to you right now, what will that message be?
Sit down. Sit down and think about what it is to be a man. Forget all of there's a verse in scripture that talks about every wind of doctrine. It talks about being swayed by every wind of doctrine. A man should not be swayed by every wind of doctrine. Everything that comes along, he's moving with it. No. So really, if you're going to be a man, you have to sit and think about it. What is it to be a man? And if you just have to sit and think before you go to social media, before you go to the library, I mean, people don't go to libraries anymore, but before you start researching what other people say, think about yourself, what you recognize in yourself, or what traits you think you want to develop in yourself. And that's the start. Because being a man is all about being resourceful. You have to have something to offer. That's what's going to make you so attractive to women. You have a lot to offer. That's what's going to make you a great father. You have a lot to offer. That's what's going to make you a great leader outside of the family unit, at work, at church, wherever you find yourself, because you have a lot to offer. So you have to start thinking and learning and teaching yourself every chance you get. You have to learn something, pick something up. That's what I have to say to any man. I think it's kind of long. I wish you could have made it a lot more concise, but that's it.
Nigel Bishop, it was a pleasure having you on Manhood Speaks.
And thanks for having me, Kat. You forced me to think about things that in my true life I've not really been thinking about. So thank you very much.